My prayer is that everybody is safe and has a wonderful Thanksgiving. Please take good care of yourselves. Create some time for self-care in the business of the Thanksgiving break, okay? We will not see each other on Thursday. I'll talk about that in a second when we get to where we are and what comes next. But the agenda for today is, well, we'll start off with reviewing our last class, as we always do. And then we'll process and finish chapter 14, psychological disorders. This is a meaty section of our general psychology class. A lot of you who are particularly interested in psychology, this is an important section of the course. So I hope you see there's such lots of good information here. Too much information, it's always a struggle what can fit into the time and what we are realistically able to achieve together. And then you have some homework that you will work on as well, okay? So that's the agenda for today. There's a video. If there's time, we'll watch it together. If not, you have the link. So please watch that video. In terms of where we are here today on part 2 of psychological disorders, and then no class on Thursday. We will meet on Zoom on Tuesday, and I will give you part 1 of chapter 15. It's the last chapter. Please come to class on time on Tuesday and Thursday next week. We will have visitors in our class. And so I will get us going relatively quickly. Your final projects are due not this Friday, but the following Friday. So please make sure you are on top of that. And I so look forward to what you come up with for your final project. The week after that, it will be our final week together. And we will watch and celebrate your achievements. So we are really at the end of our semester here. And so please recognize that time is fast going. You gotta be on top of things as best as you can, because time is not on your side. Are there any questions about where we are and where we are going next? If not, I would love for us to take a minute or two to think about our last class, right? Where are we coming from? Where are we going? In this chapter, psychological disorders, we are learning about the basic concepts of psychological disorders, anxiety, OCD, PTSD, all of that we covered in the last class. So in a minute here, I will invite some of you to let me know what you remember, what resonated with you. Today, we will talk about major depressive disorders and learn about bipolar disorders. We will also learn about schizophrenia and other disorders. So I'm repeating this information to get your juices going so that you can try and remember and be able to make the connections with today's class and today's material. This is the last slide from last Thursday. We addressed all learning objective 11. There's 21 learning objectives in this rich chapter. In objective 11, we were trying to describe how conditioning, cognition, and biology contribute to the feelings and thoughts that mark anxiety disorders, OCD, and PTSD. And so we talked about genes and the different experiences people have and how that can trigger or switch on the genes that are associated with these disorders. So this is where we ended off last time. And so I want to invite you to think about what you remember from last class, what resonated with you. And I'm also keen to know if you have any lingering questions. So take a minute, jot down at least one thing. And then I would love to hear from you what you remember from the last class. Welcome to anyone else who joined. We will have visitors in our classes next week, so please be on time, okay? So that we can get going on time too.
Hi, Dr. Courage. I hope your day is going well.
Yes, it is. Thank you.
Oh, good. I just wanted to say, I remember you telling us a couple stories of the kids you used to work with, especially the one of the girl that was walking down the highway and you didn't really know how to handle that situation.
Got handled. And some of these kids have come back to us, you know. That one never ever came back to us. That was that will be a memory for a lifetime. That young lady. Did our class help you process anything in your own lives? Things you've seen or encountered in your own lives, or made you think about what you are hoping to do with your career when you're done with school? Feel free to share any of that as well.
In nursing, you can specialize and work in psych units. And when I was in high school, I did some clinicals, and the closest thing I got to any psych unit was an emergency department. But I've gotten to see some young kids going through some very difficult times, and kind of the opposite of what you probably want to hear, but I actually would like to stay away from the psych units, especially if it involves children, because it's a really difficult thing to be around. It really takes a special heart to want to help people like that.
Yeah, I've heard that from some nursing students, you know. Remind me, Faith, what you want to specialize in.
The psych unit is definitely heartbreaking, and it takes a very, very strong-minded type of individual. I mean, I just am going off of personal experience, like visiting my brother in the psych unit multiple times, and the people there, they don't mess around. Like, they're very, very on point, I feel like, with their patients. And it, like, the thing that upsets most of the nurses I've talked to in psych units, though, is how many people are recurring in there. So it's like once they got out, it's only a matter of time before they know they'll see him back.
Wow, thanks for sharing that, Kara.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I've been switching in between like emergency department and ICU. The main difference between those two things is like how much you want get up and go and how much you want specific patient care to stay with the patient and care for them a little longer.
Nice. Well, best wishes as you figure it out. I know in the nursing program, they'll give you placements. I don't know if you will get to do ICU. I don't know if they take interns at the ICU, but oncology, an outpatient clinic, a general ward. Yeah, our nursing program does a lot to expose you to different kinds of nursing. So I hope you find your niche. I don't know if they do psych unit placements either. So all of my nursing people, I don't know what kind of exposure you will get. Thank you to the two folks who shared what you remember, what resonated with you, and what is coming up for you. But it sounds to me like this is relevant information, and you can see some of the ways we can apply this information. Yeah. So yeah, always come ready to share something that you remember, something that resonates with you, and pausing any lingering questions that arise from what we would have learned from the previous class. And I hope you will be able to see connections with what we are addressing today. So this is where we left off, and I said to you, we'll pick it up from here. So in this class, I am going to address all of these chapter objectives and help you understand psychological disorders. In the grand scheme of this class, the major goal is to try and understand and give you a general exposure to thinking processes, the mind and how the mind works. And so this is a very big section of what goes into problems around mental illness and mental or psychological disorders. Yeah. So I hope you enjoy this section. I have so much information, it might be an overload, but I know at least one juncture where we will stop and talk to each other a little bit. So let's see how all of that goes. The theme of the pictures today is waterfalls and leaf peeping. I put those two things together. Those are some of my favorite things to do. So I hope you enjoy the pictures. Okay, we're picking it up with PTSD. 10 to 35% of people experience trauma that are not only burned into their memories, but this then lasts for 4 weeks to a lifetime of repeated intrusive recall of those memories. That's what we mean when we say PTSD. These people might experience nightmares and other re-experiencing of these traumatic experiences. Social withdrawal or phobic avoidance of situations or circumstances similar to what is associated with the PTSD. People with PTSD, we might see social withdrawal. We might see them having jumpy anxiety or hypervigilance. They might struggle with insomnia or might have sleep problems. I want to invite anyone who has any experiences. You might know a certain somebody who has some of these symptoms. I will share one, and then if you know and can remember a movie you watched or someone you know, something you have seen, you'll be free to share. But at the nonprofit, we have had kiddos who struggled with personal hygiene, super smelly feet, really bad body odor. So some of them were houseless. And so it's a function of they did not have access to showers and so forth. So body self-care can be a challenge. So that's one class of the kiddos. The others, they might be PTSD associated with taking off clothes and going into the shower. So one kid would not shower. And so one of the things I train my skills trainers is to connect with those kiddos, talk with them and understand the concern. Hey, I notice there's an issue or a challenge around personal hygiene. Help me understand a little more. What do you mean? Well, I'm a little concerned that I've not seen you or heard you requesting shower supplies, and there's a bad body odor. That's why people seem to be laughing at you, and I'm concerned about your well-being. Help me understand more around challenges with self-care. And so if my skills trainers do a really nice job connecting with that young person, sometimes they have told the skills trainer that, hey, it's too frightening for me to go into the shower. My PTSD is in the shower. So I hate being in the shower. I'm afraid of being in the shower. I might pass out if I go into the shower. So that's an example of PTSD. And then when you learn about the story, this is something that happened 10, 15 years ago or whatever, yeah? So these are examples of PTSD. Does anyone have anything they want to share, something they saw in a movie or anything like that?
It's actually quite interesting. I think I've talked about my dad a little bit. He had an accident, I want to say about 6 years ago now, but he fell off a rope swing and had a really bad injury to the chest. And he spent 28 days in the hospital. But long story short, he ended up having like really bad nightmares even when he got home from the hospital. He says he'll fall in his dreams, and like right as he hits the log that he fell on that punctured his chest, he'll wake up. So yeah, I think we could all relate a little bit to having those nightmares.
Yeah. Thank you for being vulnerable with us and sharing that, Faith.
Oh, no problem.
Some of the kiddos at the nonprofit might have trouble with sleeping. And so that's a problem, especially if they're going to be disruptive when it's lights out. But if my skills trainers do a good job of connecting with the kiddos, sometimes one kid said, I have the worst nightmares in the world. Can't even talk about them. And it happens when I close my eyes. I'm so afraid of closing my eyes. I want to go to sleep. I can't. I'm too afraid. And so we then figure out some therapeutic interventions for that young person with the help of our clinical team so that they get help for the nightmares. And they might go for some CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, some psychotherapy, all of those, counseling, all of those things, so that this young person is not afraid to go to sleep. Okay, all right, I'll keep going. So conditioning rats to fear, giving rats unpredictable electric shocks. So researchers have created anxious animals. The rats, like assault victims who will report feeling anxious when returning to the scene of the crime, become uneasy in their lab environment. So we learned about classical conditioning and how that can produce fear and anxiety. It's the same thing. We can make some connections to PTSD. So let's understand anxiety, OCD, and PTSD. So there are biological reasons to these three disorders here. First one is genes. 17 gene variations are associated with typical anxiety disorder symptoms. Others are specifically associated with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. These neurotransmitters include, so basically genes regulate neurotransmitter brain levels that heighten the brain's alarm center. And so these neurotransmitters include serotonin, which influences sleep, mood, and attending to threats, and glutamate, which heightens activity in the brain's alarm center. And then you also have experience, the experiences people have in their day-to-day life. And so experience affects how genes come on or off. Genes for schizophrenia, how those genes can come on and off. It is a gene and environment and experience interaction effect. Those things are all working together And that can determine what genes come on and what genes go off. More on this one, the brain is changed by experiences. Traumatic fear learning experiences can leave tracks in the brain and create fear tracks. So you remember little Albert? He learned to fear anything that resembled the white rabbit or anything furry and animal-like. Remember the experiment that was done on little Albert, where they showed him the white rabbit and then they would make a loud noise, such that he learned to fear the rabbit. Then there was some generalization that took place, such that he then became afraid of anything that was white like that. So generalized anxiety disorder, panic attacks, phobias, OCD, and PTSD express themselves biologically as over-arousal of brain areas involved in impulse control and habitual behaviors. Are there any questions at this time? Okay, let's keep going then. We are still unpacking objective 11 as we are trying to understand the biological basis of these three disorders. When people are engaged in a challenging cognitive task, those with OCD showed the most activity in the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain's frontal area. That's the figure that you are seeing on the right. As we try to, as we unpack the biological basis of these conditions. Okay, so let's turn gears. And now we are looking at objective 12, distinguish between major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. So in this section, we will unpack anxiety, depression, major depressive disorder, and bipolar disorder. It used to be called manic depressive disorder. So that's what we are going into next, okay? So depression and major depressive disorder. Depression is the leading cause of disability worldwide, according to the World Health Organization. It's the #1 reason why mental health services are sought, why people go to counseling, go to therapy. It may have a seasonal pattern. DSM-5 classifies several major depressive disorders. So we'll look at those in a little bit.
This book that I read, or well, I've been reading and it's taking a little bit, it has a really cool chapter about depression, but it's basically saying how nowadays so many people don't want to feel natural emotions, especially including sadness. And so many people go and see a doctor because they don't know how to differentiate between depression and sadness. So that's why so many people now have been like so overly medicated, because obviously you can't take any type of scan to see if like somebody's depressed versus just sad. So it's just basically saying like, we need to be open to emotions again.
That's a good point. But remember, it becomes a psychological disorder when it is affecting daily life and affecting activities of daily living over an increased time frame. So in this next slide here, Kara, we look at the DSM-5 and how it classifies major depressive disorders as the presence of at least 5 of the following symptoms over a 2-week period of time, minimally including depressed mood or reduced interest. So if somebody is experiencing 5 or more of these things over a 2-week period, then it's more than just sadness. If you're feeling depressed most of the time, dramatically reduced interest or enjoyment in most activities most of the time, significant challenges regulating appetite and weight, significant challenges regulating sleep, physical agitation or lethargy, feeling tired and weak all the time, feeling listless or with much less energy, feeling worthless or feeling unwanted guilt, problems in thinking, concentrating or making decisions, thinking repetitively of death and suicide, then that person might have a major depressive disorder and or a bipolar disorder. Does that make sense, Kara?
Oh yeah, it definitely makes sense. I just thought it was like one of the most interesting points of the book that I've read so far, to be honest, because it also said how they were cleaning out the bottom of a lake and so many fish ended up being like on Zoloft or something from how many people's scripts ended up in the lake. But obviously there's a huge difference between major depressive and sadness and everything of that.
Right. Well, thanks for sharing that. It helps us to think because, yeah, some people might not know the difference between sadness and the pandemic and all of these things being stuck indoors for long periods of time and an actual disorder that is now kicked in. So this is the standard that clinicians use. Awesome, awesome. Keep those comments and questions coming in and let's process them together and share books that you are reading. That's all good too. All right. Bipolar disorder. Person alternates between the hopelessness and lethargy of depression and the overexcited state of mania. Less common, but often more dysfunctional than major depressive disorder. It's a potent predictor of suicide. No gender differences. Increased diagnosis amongst teens, though. The one person I know who has bipolar disorder, they are in their, they are an older adult now, in their 60s, I think, and they were first diagnosed when they were just a teen. So that is very true. And in my sample of one, the one person I know personally who has bipolar, the diagnosis, rightfully so, was done when they were 16. When we say mania, do you understand what that means?
Isn't it like ups and downs?
Yeah. It's feeling hyperactive, wildly optimistic, and then where poor choices or poor judgment can then ensue. So I think the key word there is hyperactive, wildly optimistic state. But bipolar is having major extremes on both ends. So you are right about that. When they are high, they are too happy. It's mostly abnormal, doesn't feel, look, sound right. It's too much. And then when they're sad, they hit really low lows. So
I have a cousin that's bipolar and he actually was diagnosed late. So he was diagnosed, I think, in his 20s, and he like goes through obviously phases of not wanting to take his medicine. And when he doesn't take his medicine, it's like the lowest possible lows. But I do have a friend that was diagnosed with bipolar when she was 16, and she obviously like does everything that she's supposed to. She handles it very well, but she has a lesser degree of it than my cousin. My cousin is like very, very manic.
Wow. Thanks for sharing with us.
I have a big family. There's a lot going on.
I'm African. I understand. Okay. Any theory of depression must explain at least the following things. Behavior and thoughts change with depression. Depression is widespread. Women's risk of major depressive disorder is roughly double men's risk. Most major depressive episodes end on their own. Work, marriage, and relationship stress often precede depression. Compared with past generations, depression strikes earlier and affects more people, with the highest rates among young adults in developed countries. So a lot of times it's work-related type stuff that precedes depression, marriage and relationship stuff. At the nonprofit, oftentimes when there's a heartbreak, if there's major depression at play, we might see an episode of suicide ideation, even when they break up with their partner or something like that. In my other class, I was talking about a kid I know who was 17, turning 18, turned 18, I think, even 19, I don't remember. And they wanted to dance in like a strip dancing for an occupation. They did not want to work in a store or have those kinds of regular jobs. Instead, they wanted to dance. And so that was forcing the program to have a conversation about harm reduction. So how many of you know about harm reduction? Harm reduction is when someone is choosing to go a certain route, might be unsafe in this case, and they're adamant that's what they want to do. It can be sex work, it can be doing drugs, whatever. So harm reduction is recognizing that this person is making this choice and then being thoughtful about how to help that person be safer despite the choices they're making. So with this young person who wanted to strip dance, ensuring that this person knew about healthier, safer sex, making sure they had safe transportation from their dancing job back to their place of residence. That's all harm reduction, right? But anyway, the point is relationship stress often precedes depression. This young person, when they would go and work, they would come back and they would be super depressed. And so they were receiving mental health supports around that. Any questions at all? Okay, let's continue unpacking the biological perspective to major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. So we also have genes at play. We know a lot of this information from twin studies. You can inherit genes for major depressive disorder, and 40% is attributed to inheriting those genes. Brain data shows that brain activity slows during depression and becomes more active during mania. So that research has given us a lot of information. Analysis of functional connectivity helps scientists understand how different brain regions work together. And so this factor can underlie psychological disorders. People with major depressive disorder tend to show low connectivity between brain regions involved in experiencing emotion regulation. And so these two types of brain regions don't talk to each other very well. You also have nutritional effects. A heart-healthy diet reduces risk of developing depression. Alcohol misuse can lead to depression. So nutrition can interact with biology to trigger the onset of these disorders. In this figure, you are seeing how heritability was calculated by a formula that compares the extent of similarity among identical versus fraternal twins. So if ever we say to you, please cite your sources, this is a study you can cite by Bienvenu et al. 2011. They used disaggregated data from studies of identical and fraternal twins and estimated the heritability of bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anorexia nervosa, major depressive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. Okay, so it's not only the biology that underlies these psychological disorders, you also have the social cognitive perspective. And so diet, drugs, stress, and other environmental influences lay down epigenetic marks or molecular genetic tags that can turn uncertain genes on or off. Okay. Negative thoughts, negative moods, and gender. Women are twice as vulnerable as men to depression. We see this through rumination. Rumination is consistently talking and mulling over a problem or something negative, talking about it endlessly. And then overthinking issues, explanatory styles, and the difference between men and women, self-defeating beliefs, and learned helplessness. There are many more factors. This is just to give you an idea of what that may look like. Excuse me. Cultural forces can also play a role as we think about the social cognitive, social factors, and how that interacts with thinking processes, and how that can then lead to major depressive disorder and bipolar disorder. So genes can play a part, and then culture can play a part too. Gender can play a part, and what's expected of men and women in different cultures. Right? So let's switch gears and talk about schizophrenia and other disorders. So schizophrenia is characterized by delusions, hallucinations, disorganized speech, and or diminished inappropriate emotional expression. Psychotic disorders is a group of disorders marked by irrational ideas, distorted perceptions, and the loss of contact with reality. What are some signs of schizophrenia? Disturbed perceptions and beliefs, hallucinations, delusions, disorganized speech. And so there is chronic schizophrenia, and then there's acute. So acute is the more serious of the two. As we seek to understand schizophrenia, let's talk about some brain abnormalities that underlie this condition. They have dopamine overactivity, abnormally low brain activity in their frontal lobe, their thalamus, and the amygdala. You might see abnormal anatomy in ventricles and central tissue. You might see a smaller cortex, hippocampus, corpus callosum. Corpus callosum is what connects the left and the right hemispheres. neural connection loss, all of these things happening in the physical brain help us understand schizophrenia. What are some risk factors? Low birth weight, maternal diabetes, older paternal age, having kids after the age of 40 can increase the likelihood that the child will be born with and will then later develop schizophrenia. Oxygen deprivation during delivery, mid-pregnancy virus infection and fetal brain development. So there are factors such as flu epidemics, birth in densely populated areas, that's oftentimes then associated or correlated with a low socioeconomic status, poorer healthcare services, less likely to have health insurance, and so forth. Birth in winter and spring months, mother's flu infection during pregnancy, all of these things elevate the risk of developing schiz and other disorders. Do you have any questions at this time? No? Okay, let's keep going then. This I have already mentioned. I think I repeated this slide accidentally, so I'm going to skip it because I've already talked about it. So in this slide, after a negative experience, a depression-prone person may respond with a negative explanatory style. And they're using the analogy of a breakup with a romantic partner and how they can respond, the different ways of responses. One will lead to depression and the other on the right will lead to successful coping, breaking up with a romantic partner. That you can read on your own. It's coming out of your textbook. And same with this one here. Therapists recognize this cycle and work to help depressed people break out of it. Someone has a stressful experience at point number 1. They have a negative explanatory style at number 2. They then have depression at number 3. And at number 4, they teach and train their brains to respond in specific ways when they're then depressed. Overeating, sleeping too much, loss of activity, loss of enjoyment in what are generally enjoyable activities, etc., etc. And then they go, it becomes this vicious cycle. And so therapists, in chapter 15, we'll talk about therapy and the different ways that the medical and clinical sides seek to address this. And so they do this by trying to help them change their negative thinking, turning their attention outward, engaging them in more pleasant and competent behavior. In objective 14, we seek to describe the patterns of perceiving, thinking, and feeling that characterize schizophrenia. So a lot of this I've mentioned already, how these people struggle with delusions, hallucinations, inappropriate emotional expression. That's all characteristic of people who struggle with schizophrenia. So I want to give you another example. We had a young person at the nonprofit. This person was high on the suicide ideation watch. So every 15 minutes, a staff member has to document what this young person is doing, including sleeping. You have to document now sleeping from 10 p.m. till 5 a.m. the next day, every 15 minutes. So this one young person would really take extreme measures to try and act on this suicide ideation. And so the skills trainers, we used their training to connect with the young person, to try and help them focus outward and understand why they're engaged in self-harm behaviors, trying to slash their wrists, banging their head on the wall, try to swallow nails and things like that. And so this person said, I hear voices in my head that tell me to do those things. Do you now understand why in the old days they would drill holes in someone's skull so that the bad or the evil spirits that were causing that delusion would escape and come out? So this young person said, I hear voices, and the voices tell me to kill myself. And I do know that that young person has been diagnosed with acute schizophrenia. Okay, any questions at all? Okay, this information, I think I've already mentioned the signs of schizophrenia. I may have duplicated some slides. This is a duplicated slide. This I have already mentioned. The brain abnormalities of people with schizophrenia. I was having so much fun with the pictures for you, so I didn't recognize that I duplicated some slides. That's all duplicated. This is not duplicated. And here we are addressing how genes influence schizophrenia. So what you are seeing here is that graph based on research that was done by Gottsman in 2001. So it's an old study, but it's a classic, which is why your book highlighted this study. So schizophrenia is a group of disorders influenced by many genes, each with very small effects. And so lifetime risk of developing schizophrenia varies with one's genetic relatedness to someone having this disorder. So what you're seeing on the right, across countries, barely more than 1 in 10 fraternal twins, but 5 in 10 identical twins share a schizophrenia diagnosis. So we tend to see a schizophrenic diagnosis for people who are identical twins, the reds. We tend to see more schizophrenia diagnosis in those. That's what that means. And that came out of that research done 24 years ago, or whenever that was done. Okay, so now let's switch gears and talk about other disorders. So we were talking a lot about schizophrenia, and now we're getting ready to talk about dissociative disorders. Do you have any questions? So dissociative disorders are controversial, rare disorders in which conscious awareness becomes separated or disassociated from previous memories, thoughts, feelings, and person goes into a fugue state, different state. So you have dissociative identity disorder. It is formally called multiple personality disorder. And so here we see 2 or more distinct identities, each with its own voice and mannerisms, and they seem to control the person's behavior. So describe dissociative disorders. I'm reading the objective for this section. Describe dissociative disorders and discuss why they are controversial. The first formal code for the disorder appeared in an earlier DSM edition. The current criteria are in the DSM-5. The number of displayed identities increased when dissociative disorder, identity disorder, was publicized. So when people started talking about it is when they saw a number of people who are diagnosed with this condition increase. So there is still a lot of research that is being done under dissociative identity disorder. Some of the questions that are being explored are, could DID be an extension of normal capacity for identity shifts? And people are still grappling with the evidence that is available around DID. So research is still ongoing to better understand this disorder, is the long and short of it. Objective 20, identify the 3 clusters of personality disorders and describe the behaviors and brain activity that characterize the antisocial personality. So the personality disorders include anxiety, eccentric or odd behaviors, dramatic or impulsive behaviors. So let's unpack these, all right? So antisocial personality disorder, sometimes called sociopathy or psychopathy. A lower emotional intelligence is seen in people who have this diagnosis. They tend to have impulsive behavior, feel and fear little. One time we took kiddos to OMSI. This was 4 years ago with the nonprofit. They took kiddos to OMSI. And so one kid stole candy from a display. And it was only discovered when they had left the building and getting ready to go into the van and return to the program in Lagos, Sweden. And so the staff said to the kiddo, hey, we gotta go back and return the candy. And the kiddo flipped their lid and said, no, I'm not gonna do that. And they climbed up the top of the van and sat on top and said, and refused to come down. When they did come down, they went and sat in the middle of the road. Not afraid of anything, didn't feel anything, didn't feel any empathy. People were cold, people wanted to go back to the program, people were hungry, felt nothing. So, understanding antisocial personality disorder, there are some biological factors that we need to consider. Similar to schizophrenia, there are genetic influences. We talked about brain structure, similar information will come here, and then environmental factors that can all interact to turn those genes off or on, yeah? So that's the long and short of those disorders, that you have genes, you have environmental issues going on, and then you have brain structure, the actual biological brain itself, yeah? Here we are seeing levels of the stress hormone adrenaline. They were measured in 2 groups of 13-year-old Swedish boys. In both stressful and non-stressful situations, those who would later be convicted of a crime as 18 to 26-year-olds showed relatively low arousal. So this is a study that was looking at adrenaline secretion based on stressful situations and non-stressful situations. The last set of disorders that we will look at as we seek to address objective 21 is identifying the 3 main eating disorders and explaining how biological, psychological, and social cultural influences make people more vulnerable to them. So the three eating disorders that we are concerned with are anorexia nervosa, bulimia nervosa, and binge eating disorder. So what are some factors that influence these eating disorders? Family environment and characteristics, heredity or the genes, cultural and gender components, peer effects, media influence. All of this leads to other disorders. So what I want us to do now, I'm going to put you into two groups and come up with a list of ways to overcome psychological disorders. So can you please take a minute to jot down some thoughts on overcoming the psychological disorders that we have looked at in today's class? What can families, communities do to help overcome the impact, the effect of psychological disorders? I'll give you one idea to jumpstart your thinking. We can accept that there are psychological disorders. So minimize and remove the stigma and the shame around mental disorders. It's very frustrating when we do group work and people just don't say anything. Please say, hi, I'm thinking. Just don't be quiet. I think it's rude and it's very inconsiderate to your colleagues. So I'm giving you time to think about some, things big and small that can be done to overcome the impact and the effects of psychological disorders. Okay, so please jot down some thoughts so that you have something to contribute to your group, okay? I'm going to put you into two groups and give you 2 minutes. It's 5 people per group and everybody has to say something, okay? You're not allowed to not say something. Take 20 more seconds to think of something to share with your group. And then when you come back, please elect someone who can report back to the rest of the group. Jot something down, bring something to the table. Okay, take 2 minutes. I'll bring you back in 2 minutes. Other group was still talking when I was with them. Welcome back, everybody. Yeah, please share what you shared. Let's hear from group one. Go for it.
I don't know which group we were, but I'll go ahead and start it off. We said talking to a nutritionalist, meditation, join a support group. In a lot of treatment centers, they aren't allowed to have phones, and the main reason for that is no social media, and you need to practice not comparing yourself. And trauma prevention.
What did trauma prevention look like, sound like?
We didn't discuss that much. We just kind of mutually agreed on like, yeah, that sounds like something that, I mean, when I think of that, I think of maybe trying to avoid bullying situations or situations that they're already on social media and comparing themselves at a young age.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
The other group?
Our group just said to like spread awareness and to kind of like seek more help throughout like our school, because sometimes we ourselves even get confused on what we're like dealing with. But yeah, just seeking help and spreading awareness. Yeah.
Awesome. Those are wonderful insights. Therapy, you got it, that one. Desensitization is a type of therapy. Reprocessing, learning how to reprocess difficult memories. Oftentimes, counseling and therapy help with that process. Restructuring is also another technique that will come out in and through therapy. We'll process all of these things when we start on chapter 15 on Tuesday. And then managing and reducing stress. Everybody needs to manage their stress as best as they can, because that can lead to extreme stress and turn on those genes for a lot of the disorders that we talked about today. Okay, I hope you enjoyed talking with your colleagues a little bit and processing this information. Okay, so that is all I had for you for today. I was tempted to play the video that I have, but I think you can do that on your own. It's 6 minutes long. I will allow you to use the remaining 6 minutes of class to watch that video on your own, and or to upload your reflection questions for today's class. Please remember that we will have visitors on Tuesday, so it's important that we come to class on time. If I don't see you again, may you have a happy and safe Thanksgiving. I'll stick around if you have any questions. Otherwise, take care, everybody.
Have a good break.